Who is here for the first time? Oh, good. They're getting fewer and fewer. Well, come back. This is the end of the summer season, I'm afraid. But in the autumn, we have some fantastic people I've just recruited. John Major, Kate Moss, Peter Mendelsohn, Annabelle Goldsmith, and various other extraordinary people. But today, I'm so glad Kirsty Young is my last of the summer, in the last of the summer season, because she's one of my heroines, and I'm sure she's one of yours. And don't be cheeky. Mary Humphrey always says, victimize 2 people in the audience and give them hell. Then the rest will laugh. What happens is that I have a conversation with Kirsty for about 20 minutes, and then I want you to ask her intelligent questions, and they need to be intelligent because she's highly intelligent, and we don't want to waste her time. Now, I just want to say that somebody said interviewing Kirsty Young is like being a commie chef and someone telling you to cook a 4-course meal for Hester Blumenthal. Because she's the queen of questionnaire. But I'm glad that she herself has actually done a Desert Island disc, and we might refer to some of them in a minute. But my first question is this. I mean, the BBC Radio, as you know, is known throughout the world to be the best broadcaster. And you, Kirsty, has been consistently named and voted the best voice. Ergo, you are the best voice in the world. Do you feel that you have the most attractive voice in the world? And you go training like an opera star, and in the morning, do you have to yodel before you gargle?
I'll tell you 2 things about my voice. One is, I was thrown out of the school choir because it was too deep, and my singing teacher in Scotland, they don't suffer fools, and he said, "Oi, Old Man River, out." Secondly, whenever I order room service, which is a treat afforded me relatively often because my husband's in the hotel business, without fail, I give my order and they say, "Sir, it'll be with you in about 30 minutes." So there are many cases, where my voice has not been a strength for me, but I think it's proven, isn't it, that a slightly deeper voice, people listen to a slightly deeper voice. And I think also being Scottish, people imagine my voice is classless. My voice isn't classless, but I think because people don't really know that much about Scotland, they think it's classless. So I think my voice is played in my favor.
But in fact, it is extraordinary because up till 10 or 20 years ago, the way in which people regard the BBC voice is the received pronunciation.
Absolutely, yes.
And that you actually got a bit of a Scottish accent. Now, if I had been listening to you when I first learned English, I might not have been able to understand half the things you say. So it is extraordinary, and I put that down to your calming tonality. I've analyzed it very, very carefully, and I think it's your calming tonality which makes you the popular voice you are. You're never in a hurry. Even when you are asking a panicking question, you throw it out as if it was a smoothie, and then the other interviewee get a bit caught. So I just want to say to you that it is a phenomenon, and I think that you are ahead of everybody for having this melodious voice, which makes you incredible.
Can I just say about that I think in any career that does all right, as you will know, timing has a lot to do with it. And I happen to begin my career at a point when it was suddenly fine for, I started my career reading the news in Scotland, when it was fine for women to read the news, because a couple of women had incredibly done it very well, imagine that, and so I was sort of allowed in. And also the BBC was starting to think that regional voices should possibly be incorporated in their oeuvre. And when I first came to London, I'd worked for quite a long time in Scotland in news and current affairs, and I came down and I was at a launch party for the first channel that I worked for down here. I used to work for the BBC in Scotland, but I was working for Channel 5 when it first launched here, and I went to a launch party, and I was feeling very pleased with myself to have got the job. And I was chatting to people. It was a very nice, very glamorous night, and I've been chatting away to this film producer, and she was saying, what do you do? And I was telling her I had this great new job. And we'd been talking for a good 20 minutes, and she, at the end of it, she said, just one thing. And I said, yes. She said, the news, you're reading the news. And I said, yes. She said, are you going to do it in that voice? And I suddenly, my balloon was well and truly punctured, because I sort of thought my voice was fine. So I think everything is to do with timing and the relativity of that. And I think I happened to enter the profession at a time when suddenly it was fine, sort of fine to be female, and it was sort of fine to have.
But I tell you what I think the secret was. You were the first broadcaster to read the news standing up.
What a revolution
and
that was.
And that was revolution. I mean,
but news is a very conservative medium, and now everybody stands up or perches on desks or leans or. But at the time, it's so. It's a tiny, tiny thing. But it was based on the idea that, if we went to see our doctor 30 years ago, they'd be behind a desk like this, and we would be sitting opposite them. And then, now when we go to see our doctor, we're at the side and they're at the side, and there's an open flow of communication. The idea of me perching at the front was. It sounds so sort of simplistic, but really literally to break down that barrier. You were not being handed down the news from on high, on a tablet of stone. It was more a dialogue, and it does sound a little bit hackneyed, but that was the idea at the time.
But I think that hit your Scottish accent a bit, because people were thrown as wobbly, and they get distracted, and they say, oh, she's standing up. I remember it, and I thought,
did you watch it?
Yes, of course. I'm educated. But you never left your Scottish roots, because you were born in a very remote area. And one of the discs that you chose yourself was by Dougie MacLean, called Caledonian. And it was just so quintessentially Scottish that it went back to your roots. And you never ever forget it.
Well, I'm sure it's like anybody here. You can't. Sometimes we want to get away from who we are. Luckily, I never did, because I like my family. I'm close to them, and fortunately, it's reciprocated. But it doesn't matter. Much to my surprise, I married an Englishman. I have children that say won't and can't and don't, and that is perplexing to me, because that's not the way I speak, but I am always in my very essence a Scottish person. Whenever I'm home in Glasgow, that is absolutely speaks to me like no other place on earth.
Not only did you marry an Englishman,
yes,
but you were a product of being a stepchild and having a stepfather. And the man you married, Nick Jones, whom I interviewed here not so long ago,
how did that go?
Was also not a touch. The opening was already B- compared to what you have performed, or even beta minus. But he was also already married, and you got into the situation of being a stepmother. So your life, your marital life, your love life, has been totally seized up and surrounded by stepchildren, stepmothers, and so forth. So your choice of a husband was deliberately complicated.
Well, it wasn't deliberately complicated.
Well, it's deliberately because you married him.
Yeah, I know.
Voluntarily.
But I foolishly thought love will conquer everything. That way when you're blinded by love. And I did. I fell like a ton of bricks for my husband, and I thought, I can do that. But actually, no, it's a big challenge, being a stepman, which has nothing to do with my entirely delightful stepchildren, I have to say, they were 3 and 5 when I met Nick, and he was looking after them full time. So they were absolutely part of the package.
But were there moments of hesitation? Christ, I'm taking on to 2 fairly grown-up children, with whom I gather you get on very well today.
Yeah.
But at that time, did you have any sense of trepidation?
No, because I was an idiot. I didn't know what I was
Did
getting
you have to
myself-
listen to another piece which you chose, like the Bach cello suites,
Yes, the solo
to
suite.
seek
Yeah, I do
solace
now.
from that? Because that suite is an incredible, haunting, lonely voice whenever you hear it.
Well,
don't
it's
you?
the human condition, isn't it? I interviewed, the reason that the Bach solo suites is on my list, and actually I did my list of 8 Desert Island Discs when I was being interviewed for a publication rather than, I've never actually been on the program, but that was on my list. And the Bach solo suites is on my list. I listened to it whenever I'm researching a guest. I try to understand a lot about guests. And Stephen Isserlis was one of my guests, who is a phenomenal cello soloist, obviously. And so I started listening. I knew the piece of music, but I didn't know it well. And I started listening to it again and again and again. And it's very meditative and brilliant, and as you say, sonorous, and it is really about the human condition and is remarkable. So it is on my list of 8 if I were to do the program. But when I interviewed him, it's the Everest you are climbing if you learn that as a soloist. And I was talking to him about it, and he'd managed to record it just before his father died, and it was a momentous thing for him to be able to do it, and he'd done it in a certain time frame, and his father had heard it. And so I was saying to him, when you go back and listen to it now, what is that experience like for you? Because it is not just the phenomenal accomplishment of being able to play it so exquisitely, but also the fact that it is loaded with the importance of it being a piece that you wanted to record in order that your father could hear you do it. And he said, "Oh, I've never listened to it again." And I said, "You've never listened to it since you recorded it?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Well, it would be like a dog going back to inspect its mess." And for me, it's one of the most exquisite pieces of recorded music I've ever heard, but it was such a phenomenal thing to hear an artist of that caliber, who was still, of course, which is why he is an artist of that caliber, was still dissatisfied with what he's done. But his recording is my singular favorite recording of that.
You are doing it now for the 10th year,
Yes.
10th anniversary, coinciding with the program's 75th anniversary.
Yes.
And it is a long time, and of course you have interviewed endless, fascinating people. But I read that you related particularly to Blondie, because when you were 10, you thought that she was the star, and when you met her, you were starstruck.
I
Is
was,
that right?
and I had to fess up. And I mean, I've done fabulous people. You know, I've done
absolutely.
Bill Gates, and I've done Dustin Hoffman. I mean, it's an incredible job in that respect. But I thought there's a point at which you could sort of tip over into a kind of oleaginous state. And I thought I have to just be honest and say that from the ages of, I would say about 12 to 15, I basically wanted to be Debbie Harry. So I thought I've got to just fess up. And also, she was so exquisitely beautiful. I imagine quite like, you know, when you read about Marilyn Monroe, people say she was lit from the inside. Well, Debbie Harry was like that. I sort of found myself kind of falling into her eyes, and her skin was glowing, and I thought, I just have to say, I'm in awe of you.
She had piercingly blue eyes.
Extraordinary, and almond-shaped, and very, very exquisite.
But why didn't you choose a song from her?
Well, that's a really good question. I suppose the songs that we choose are...
Instead of which you had a sugary Andy Williams. You are just too good to be true.
Can't take my eyes off of you.
And where's that syrup come
Well,
from?
I'll tell you where that syrup comes from. That was the night I met my husband. The reason but the reason I didn't choose Debbie Harry is I probably could sing the whole of Parallel Lines to myself, so I wouldn't need her version of it.
I mean, you've also met some extraordinary people who you've confessed have actually changed your own minds and views about things, like Ken Robinson on education and David Knott on health. So this 10 years has been not only an understanding of what others people think, but how they have influenced your own life.
Completely. I think I started off working in news and current affairs, which is a very black and white environment. You make the snap decision, you've got 1 minute 20 to interview people. It's all go, go, go. Is this good? Is this bad? What are we going to... And Desert Island Disc is an entirely different animal, where you get to really... You know, I do a couple of days research for every person. I spend for the media, a relatively long time in their company when I'm interviewing them in front of the mic. And I think it has been my education, literally, in terms of the things I've read, the things I've been exposed to. You know, soft matter physics or whatever, all sorts of things I would never have bothered to read and at least in my way try to understand, but also listening to the reason why people are where they are is, I can't imagine it would have happened to me in a different job. You understand how life is full of grey areas and that most people, most of the time, are just trying to work it out. And the news doesn't really allow you to do that, and Desert Island Discs has allowed me to do that.
I mean, you work very assiduously, 42 weeks out of 52 in a year.
I know, for quite a lazy person, I work quite hard. I don't.
But you just confessed, and I read that you do only 2.5 hours researches.
No, 2.5 days.
All right, 2.5 days then.
Yeah.
So you're in a half-time job, 1/3 job. You're back to the miners' days, 3-day week. So what do you do with the other?
I'm basically...
So are you lazy?
I'm basically lazy and having my nails done. No, I'm not. I do all sorts of other things. I do other things. I do some television work still, and I'm president of UNICEF UK, so I do that. So I do different
What do you
things.
do for UNICEF UK?
I basically am a sort of high-class hustler for UNICEF UK.
Or an ambassador?
I go out... No, I'm not an ambassador. I'm president. So I go out and I talk to people. Yeah, in the UK.
I mean, do you trust a big organization like that?
I trust them.
You
I don't know
trust
if I
them?
trust ones
Do you
like
know how much
them.
they spend on administration?
I know
UNICEF?
exactly how much they spend.
How
They
much?
spend 27 pence in every pound they raise,
Yeah,
raising...
too high.
I don't think it is
You've
too
got
high.
to tell them, yeah.
No, I don't think it is too high, actually.
You
I
don't
think
think
if you look at charities generally, they spend 27 pence... No, sorry, they spend 27 pence raising their next pound, and they spend 3 pence in administration, and the rest goes directly to aid. And I was absolutely assiduous in my research on them before. I was very flattered to be asked, but after that, after the moment's flattery, I thought I need to look into this. So I think their administration costs at 27p are reasonable, and their 3 pence costs I'm happy with, and the rest of it goes direct. And I've seen it with my own eyes. I've traveled to see a lot of their projects, and I'm absolutely certain, and I don't think it's the case with every charity of that size. I do think it's the case with them.
Which is the most moving project you have seen in UNICEF?
I think it would be in the northern territories of Ethiopia. They had an extraordinary, it was a feeding program, but it was not a feeding program we'd think of, which is in order to try to eradicate malnutrition. It was actually a feeding program for mothers who themselves had not been mothered. So they had, they would have lost their mothers during the famine 25 years ago, and therefore they had never been shown how to feed their own children. And this was, they called it a kind of a mother's army of women who went out to teach these young women how you can nutritionally wean your baby from hopefully the breast and then onto a nutritional program. And I sat in it was extraordinary, and many thousands of feet, 3,000 feet above sea level in Tigray province in the north of Ethiopia, and sat with these women, this women's army, who were all women from the local community and slightly beyond, teaching young mothers how they should be feeding their children, and literally grinding up herbs, grinding up vegetables, pulping it up, showing them how and you thought, well, that is where the breakdown begins, when you have something like a famine that wipes out almost an entire generation of mothers who often gave up their food for their children, the children that are sitting there now as mothers themselves. How is that taught? And it was a very, very practical thing. It was done from the bottom up. And the next day, there was one other project I went to see, which was to do with, seed capital is something we've all heard about. But this was even almost smaller, if you can conceive that, than seed capital. And it was a woman who was standing in her own store in what passed for a high street in one of these villages in the uplands of Ethiopia, who had been given just a few dollars each month to restock her shelves for about 3 or 4 months before she started to be able to buy her own stock. And she was now building her own house with 2 bedrooms for her 4 children, had a full-time job running a tiny general store which was immaculate, and had her, not just her self-worth and a sense of dignity and her own job, but it was tiny, tiny amounts of capital that had been life-changing for her, literally a few dollars.
You feel angry when you see something like that?
I felt so angry when I came back from Ethiopia, and it was so predictable, and I felt like such a cliche. I felt like a woman living in the Western world where we are all relatively, most of us, drenched in
is that the reason why
privilege.
you chose an extraordinary piece of music which I know very well, the Gorecki.
Do you like that?
Yes, I mean he's a very great composer for the piano as well, but he has this haunting theme, and you've chosen the
Symphony
the
Number
Lento,
3.
yeah, similarly the Lente and Largo, I think, with this extraordinary haunting music. You couldn't get more depressing because this whole thing was set in Auschwitz and so forth. But I just feel that
I am
you
Scottish,
must have that sort of anger in you.
I'm Scottish, and you know, life we're quite a to use a good Scottish word, we're quite a dreich bunch. You know, life is the good bits are only
The
good because.
Presbyterians.
Well, I'm not personally a Presbyterian, but I do come from that sort of self-flagellating background of Presbyterianism. But I think the Gorecki Symphony it's a little bit like the Bach. It's light and shade, and we only appreciate the light because we understand the shade, you know?
I mean, when I hear it, I need to switch it off halfway because I feel suicidal. Incidentally, Presbyterian, I don't know whether you know, is an anagram for Britney Spears.
I didn't know, and that's another reason I love you. I didn't know that.
Mother-in-law is Hitler woman. That's extraordinary. Anyway, you started off your first interview as Desert Island Disc with, and Monge too is Mao Zedong. That's extraordinary. With Quentin Blake, whom I knew a bit because I translated Roald Dahl's story, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Was he fascinating?
He was fascinating. He was very, very shy, and I was very, very nervous, which I don't think made for the most perfect interview. But he was a fascinating, gentle, brilliant man. Yes, he was brilliant.
And then you had Beckham as your sort of 75th celebrant, and you were criticized by some snooty snob busybody for not having invited somebody grander of Nobel Prize status and so
who
forth.
said that? I didn't know that.
I don't know, some twat. But,
well, here's the thing. We have lots of grand people, and the idea of Desert Island is it's a sort of cultural cross-section. So I think there's room for everybody, and I think Beckham was a perfectly fine 75th birthday guest.
And for the first time recently, pop music has actually overtaken classical music as music. Are you pleased about that?
No, I'm not. I'm not pleased about it. I genuinely don't feel one way or the other about that. And I think that it is almost inevitable, given that we now, we have castaways who came of age when rock and roll and pop began. So it is an inevitability that those tunes will mean more to people than 50 years ago, because they were people for whom, Bill Haley had not happened, the Beatles had not happened, the Rolling Stones had not happened, the Doors were not there, while they were at those seminal moments in their lives. So I think it is a statistical probability that is going to be part of it. But I still think we get people choosing exquisite pieces of what would be considered very serious music.
You've chosen, the Bach and the Gorecki.
Do I pass?
And, you chose another classical piece, which is extraordinary, because it is, for me, a piece of music that I would have thought only a pianist would enjoy, the Schubert 960, massive sonata, number 21. And I listened to it this morning, imagining why you enjoyed that particular piece of music. Is there a context which gave you to choosing that piece of music?
Do you know, particularly for that one, there are two things. I heard Barenboim play the late Schubert sonatas maybe 18 months ago. Singularly the most exquisite thing I have been witness to in my life. So that was a moment where I sat with tears running down my face at the barbecue. It was an amazing night. But also, I think, aside from that, that was really to be moved by somebody's brilliance. But aside from that, I just think it is simply a towering work.
Well, yes, I mean,
That's
it
really.
It is an extraordinary work, and there are great great interpretations of that. And then you go back to sort of, I wouldn't say frivolous, but, Nina Simone. I mean, you say you can't live without her voice. Is that right?
That is right. And to me, every female voice is in that voice, because I think, for me, I love to listen to Joni Mitchell. I like the female voice, but I think Nina Simone's voice, is it sad? Is it happy? Is it full of celebration? Is it full of sadness? Well, the truth is it is all in there, and I find, which one of hers did I put on the list?
Well, you said that, my baby just cares for me because that's
my
your
sister,
favorite, it's
yes.
because your sister, I wish she
Yes.
was here, because you say that if she ever listens to that, she'll start standing up and dance, and we could have seen her dance.
You would pay to see my sister dance. She is the most brilliant dancer and does a dance that is at once brilliant but also makes me laugh till I cry, because she and I share a sense of humor, so she can make me laugh. I think Nina Simone, I would have I'm more likely to listen to Mississippi Goddamn or something a little bit more esoteric, but My Baby Just Cares for Me, it reminds me of my sister.
I have to say, the great thing about Nina Simone is she's got so much style.
Oh, yes.
And you can see her, not just as a singer, but in the context of a cabaret or
Absolutely.
in a room full of wonderful people smoking, drinking, which you now never bloody see.
You're going to the wrong places.
You think so? It's not that funny. But you said Joni Mitchell, but you jettisoned her with Van Morrison instead.
Yes.
I mean, he just took the edge. And I love Van Morrison, but you think he's a great lyricist.
I do think he's a poet. I've never been able to interview him, and he is notoriously tricky to interview, and he's still on my list of people I'd like to interview. But I think, I would say Joni Mitchell comes under the same umbrella as Debbie Harry, and I could probably sing it badly to myself. But Van Morrison, I think it's poetry. I think it's exquisite.
Out of 100 people, how many turn you down?
It's very rare. And usually people, when they say no, they say not right now. Sometimes it's not, the alchemy of asking somebody at the right time for them is also important. And sometimes, interestingly, sometimes people say, I'm not going to say who, but a couple of people have said to me, well, you know what, my mother's not dead yet, so I can't be honest. Or, or people will say, it's the wrong time after I divorced my third wife, and can you just wait till the dust
Well,
is...
I know that Lucian Freud said no, and now he's dead, so I'm afraid
He did say no, yes.
Yeah.
He said, I'm not very public-spirited. That's what he said, which I thought was fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. And tell us just very quickly about Beckham. Was he good?
I think I was very glad to interview David Beckham at the time I did, because I think he is on a constant sort of journey of self-development, and I think he would not have given the same interview 5 years or even 10 years earlier. He is, I think he's genuine. He talked about his imperfections. He seemed entirely in the moment. He gave a lot of his time. I mean, he's obviously, the machine that surrounds him is very carefully considered, but we didn't agree any questions, which we never do with anybody, so it was on that basis that, you come in and I'll ask you what I ask you, and I think he was incredibly straightforward and obviously incredibly good looking.
You ask him... You asked him if he was pissed off for not getting a knighthood yet.
That story broke after. So I didn't ask him about that, but obviously if I'd been interviewing him after that was in the public domain, I certainly would have asked him.
Who is your next victim?
We're never allowed to.
No, I mean, what's being
next?
scheduled?
I don't know.
No?
I don't know who that is. That's terrible that I don't know.
And I want to ask you the last question before I throw open to that. What was your item of luxury if you had to choose one? You get the Bible, you get you get a book. Yeah. Which book would you choose, and what luxury would you have?
I still don't know my book. It probably changes every week depending on what I'm reading.
What, 50 Shades of Grey?
We're going to have to start giving that as a given, aren't we? No, I think I really do not know my book. I can't pin my book down. My
luxury item?
It would be I've got a beautiful 4-poster bed, and it would be that, because I think I could go under it for shade. all the sheets would smell of all my dogs and all my children. And I think it would be comforting and useful and probably, I mean, I'm not going to survive. So I think it would be a nice place to die, basically. I think.
All right, listen, let's have a few questions. Who want to ask a question? Okay, there. Anybody that grab hold of a microphone can ask.
Hello. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm Russian and I have adopted Desert Island Discs, so I didn't grow up with it, and I love it. It's my favorite. So thank you for that. So is it you who decide who comes on the program, and also do you share questions or some hints with your interviewees in advance?
So we never share anything in advance, and that is an unusual state of affairs, because in the last probably 25 years or so, publicists have taken over the interview circuit for good reason. I get why that's happened, but it's not. I don't think it's to the advantage of a thorough interviewer. And what publicists will always say, and on the many wonderful shows that you particularly see on television, this is the case, that the publicists will have agreed, maybe not precise questions, sometimes precise questions, and certainly areas that are no-go. So we don't do that, and we make it very clear to our interviewees that we don't do that. So if anybody feels that they're not comfortable with that, they're not going to come on the show. So no is the answer to that.
I absolutely agree. These publicists, they're just, I mean, what is the point? I mean, the point is that you've got to catch the person spontaneously.
Exactly.
And they're parasites.
Your words, not mine. And it's a perfectly reasonable job to have, but I think it mitigates.
The grey men who surround. I mean, if I had to go through publicists and grey men to get people to come here, you wouldn't be sitting here.
No,
I mean, you've got to talk to them
absolutely
immediately.
And I think it's a great disservice to
Yes.
listeners. It's ludicrous, the idea that you sit and say,
Yeah,
tell me
you're
about
gonna
how
go
wonderful it is
prepared.
being wonderful. I mean, who wants to hear that?
Ridiculous. That's why half the politicians in this world is complete crap, because they can't go on to look at your prime minister. She daren't go in front of anybody to say anything impromptu. Go on.
Hi.
So can I just the final bit of that? The who comes on is a very muscular discussion between myself and my brilliant editor Kathy and somebody higher up the tree, and we all the time are looking at people all the time, and it is that cross section. So it equally could be a 3 Michelin-starred chef or the Home Secretary. The idea is what is happening now in the world, and it is a high bar, So that's.
And it was a high bar when you went to Burma to interview Aung San Suu Kyi.
It was. That was quite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that the only time when you went abroad?
It's the only time I've been abroad, and I think you talk about a program with
Don't
a
say that. It's the only time when you've been abroad.
for the program. I mean, I do
No,
travel
abroad.
generally. Anyway, I beg your pardon. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm not Russian, but I was born in Soviet Union too, so I do speak Russian. My question is about music, more music. It's not a secret that a lot of people don't listen to opera. They listen actually to popera.
Yes.
Andrea Bocelli, El Divo, Catherine Jenkins,
Yes.
Russell Watson, whatever. What do you think about this popera stuff? And did you ever interview anyone of poperas?
I don't.
Thank you.
I don't think I've interviewed Alfie Boe, who I know does a lot of who obviously is an incredibly accomplished opera singer, but also does stray into those areas of sort of musicals and popular music. Personally, I have absolutely no problem with it. I think anybody's choice is both legitimate and revealing. And I don't think it's my place to think, oh, that's not quite the thing. I think that whatever people choose, that's sort of the beauty of it, that they can say, well, my love for Il Divo started when I was, and you just think, okay, well, tell us about that. Tell us about your love for Il Divo.
No, but you mustn't be a snob. I mean,
I
it's not
think
so
it's
much.
fine. I think I do. I really honestly feel that. I feel whatever people pick. There was a guy who picked a Hungarian cabbage picking song, which I could do without listening to ever again. But I generally think whatever people pick is entirely fine by me. It really is.
I mean, it is not. I mean, the street tenors started all that crap, but it is Pavarotti, and if I heard another Nessun fucking Dorma. I'm going to go crazy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a wonderful evening. My name is Béatrice Colbrand. I'm a French national. I was trained and practiced as a member of the Paris Bar, and I'm a regular auditor of your exciting Desert Island Disc program. I have two quick questions. The first question is that I was extremely pleased to hear Nicole Farish. She's a compatriot.
Oh, yes, yes.
Especially very pleased to listen to hear that her luxury would be to take David, her the husband, on the island, and that was it. She would be perfectly happy with that.
Yes, it wasn't allowed.
But
though, yeah.
but I just wonder if you have the idea of bringing more foreign guests. Even have them in translation from all around the world, like any other country. And one of my dreams would be to have Brigitte Bardot, on Desert Island Disc, because she's refused so many interviews. So just a question.
I think Brigitte Bardot is a great idea. I actually, to my shame, do not know if she's ever done it. Have you searched the archive? I don't know if she's ever...
She might consider it, but she would not be able to speak English. So
Yes.
you would have to have her in translation.
So
Is that something acceptable?
Here is the reason that I don't think that would work, because I completely take your point, but I am always, I think it's wonderful to have guests from all around the world. The difficulty is there are two things. Sometimes they don't quite get it. So it is quite a quirky little idea, isn't it? You know, the hammock and the 8 discs and the luxury. So sometimes they're not as au fait, that's about the extent of my French, incidentally, as they might be with the format. So that's like, because it is something of a parlor game in the exchange. And also I think in the exchange, as the person is sitting in the studio, if you can imagine, I'm sitting like this, they're facing me, behind them is the control room, but to them, providing I'm doing my job, it's a conversation between the two of us. For example, I went in last week to record a brilliant Castaway, and there was a different sort of mic setup and lots of cables, and I said to the technician, the studio manager, you need to get rid of all of this, because it's just me and them. Now, I don't even want a mic stick, it's just me and them. And I think if you had a translator, people become more conscious of what they say, and then I have to wait to find it out. And actually, it's in that exchange of me looking in their eyes, they say something, or smiling towards them, or making them feel it's fine, that I think a translator would get in the way of that, I think. I think that would be a different sort of interview, and there's something about, radio has a great intimacy to it, and I think the third person might slightly break that relationship between...
Have other countries asked for the format? I mean, would you...
There was a very, very famous movie producer who was trying to get it recently, who came up against it.
But they have to pay for it?
They just wouldn't get it.
Oh, right, okay. Well, you can get some French billionaire to make an offer, and you can do it in French. Wait, okay, next, yeah.
I can hear.
Hello?
Yes.
You obviously do this amazing research, so I was wondering which was your most surprising interview? Which was the interview which went completely different way that you expected?
So the best interviews are always the ones that don't go where you expect. So when I go, I think, I go in prepared and I have all the questions that are in my head and written down, I've got them there, and actually the best ones are where you think, oh, I didn't know that. And that's the best bit. So you go in with the safety net of the research, but the best moment is when you find out something new, because it means somebody's never said it before. I think, it's difficult for me to pick one because it happens a lot, and it's fabulous for me as the interviewer. Yoko Ono was a big one when she started to talk about contemplating a termination with John Lennon of their son, and I'd never read that anywhere. I thought it was extraordinary that she was sharing it with me, a complete stranger, but she was very sort of free-spirited. But it happens a lot when people suddenly... I think it's the music, I think the music is a great key. Somebody once brilliantly said music, in fact it was about cello music, speed dials the soul. And I do think that when people have their furniture of their music around them, it helps them to feel comfortable and present, and it's not, doing a radio interview is not intrusive, you don't have lights, you don't have technicians. I think that can all mitigate towards it. And it happens, that's when I know I've probably done a reasonably good job, is when we go to those unexpected places, and it happens all the time. I interviewed one of the world's most eminent CEOs recently of a $430 billion company. This was just last week. It did not go where I expected it to go. It hasn't gone out yet. It was extraordinary, and I absolutely was not I don't mean it was extraordinary. If you're listening, you'll make your own judgment, but it was extraordinary for me because it went to places I did not expect. And so that is the golden moment.
What, talked about things which were too technical?
No. Was entirely raw, was entirely emotional, was entirely in the moment, was so exposed and intimate and honest, and it was not what I expected.
Yeah, okay. Is it on?
Hello.
Hello.
Kirsty. My name's Ashley Cohen, and these ladies have come from Russia, and one lady has come from France, and I'm embarrassed to say I've only come from Penzance in Cornwall.
That's quite a long way still,
But
actually.
Quite, you came from Israel, top mod, kolakovodlach. Anyway, it's been worth it so far. I've got, like the French lady, 2 questions for you. And the first one is that in all the episodes I've listened to of yours, and unfortunately I have to admit I've missed a few, the most revelatory piece of music to me, because I'm a musician myself, came from Anton Deck, surprisingly, and it was by Eduardo Gil, the Russian singer of Spanish origin, and it was called I Am Very Glad That I've Started to Become On My Way Home.
Yes.
As this lady says, it was also called Lo 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 Lo, yeah. And you only played 2 minutes of it, and I thought, this is the most amazing thing. I thought, Anton Deck? So I went on the internet and listened to it, and in the end bit that you didn't play goes right up the top. He's got a range of 3 octaves. It's incredible.
And can you remember? I'd completely
I couldn't
forgotten that
forget.
they'd chosen that. But what was their reason for it? Was it because it made them laugh?
It was, I think one of them found it, and he said, obviously colloquially, if anybody needs translation, I'll do it for you. He says, why, I went down and I said to him, why, this is a great track. We should listen to this before we do any of our gigs, like, man. And you said to him, what did Ant say? You said to Ant, what did you say? And he said, I said, you're quite right, Bonnie lad. We'll listen to it every time before we're going to a gig, like. And so I listened to the whole thing, and then I thought, well, it's obviously been like Bill Withers doing It's a Lovely Day. He holds on for a minute at the end. It's done in the studio. But there's a video of him on YouTube.
Yes, I've
and
watched
he comes out and he just sings the whole thing. He goes right up to the top D. It's incredible. And then down 2 octaves to the next note. And he's dead now, unfortunately, so we won't get a chance to see him in concert.
But you can listen to their program. And
so my question for you is, what's the greatest musical revelation you've had?
Oh, my goodness.
And can I ask you the second question now before I sit down? Second one is, your predecessor, Roy Plumley, famously used to court his guests by taking them to a gentleman's club, having a meal with them, possibly a couple of snifters as well.
I think they might have done that, yes.
Yeah, now unfortunately, even though we've got sexual equality, you're not allowed to go into gentlemen's clubs. How do you prepare your guests? Those are my 2 questions.
It's a miserable cup of tea and a biscuit, I'm afraid. Well, those days of the BBC royally entertaining guests, and it used to happen in the green room as well. People would get completely sloshed before they went on parky, and it was all the better for it. And we live in such a puritanical time and a time of such sort of straitened budgets that we don't do that anymore. I mean, it's probably better for my liver, and it's probably better for the interview, but it is a bit of a shame. In terms of the musical revelation, do you mean one that I've had listening to on the program, or you? It happens all the time. Every week I think I need to put that on I need to go onto iTunes and download that, and of course I always forget. So what I need to do is go back through the archive and listen. It happens all the time. And also, when you're in the moment of interviewing somebody, even if it's not a piece of music that you would naturally love, when they describe to you why they love it. I mean, Bill Gates told a brilliant story about the night before his wedding. He had, and I imagine it was probably quite a nice wedding, all things being considered. He had rented every. He didn't tell me this bit, but I knew it. He had hired every helicopter. It was in Hawaii, within a sort of 100-mile radius, so nobody could rent a helicopter. When he knew the date of his wedding, he rented all the helicopters, so none of the paparazzi guys could rent a helicopter. So he says to his wife the night before his wedding, should we just go for a walk on the beach? Tomorrow's a big day. And they walk down the beach, and coming towards them after 10 or 15 minutes as they walk down this deserted beach in Hawaii is a guy strumming a guitar, and that guy is Willie Nelson to serenade his wife. And I know, quite nice to be a billionaire, it turns out. So that was it was beautiful because I wouldn't have expected Bill Gates to be that man, and also it was beautiful that he was willing to tell the story, and also it was a beautiful piece of Willie Nelson music. So that was yeah.
Well, don't forget, and is in a bad way. So I would put that down to being a crazy moment of finding that song. It was probably very high at the time.
Hi, I'm Josephine.
Hi.
Your professional and no, I'm fine, thanks. Your professional and personal lives, it's really, full of blessings and very charmed. I was just wondering, personally, for you, in your personal life, how important was it for you to be a mum? You are a mum, so...
I am a mum. Do you know, I'll tell you, I am very admiring and not surprised, because I've heard it so many times when I read or say, and I have many friends like this who will say, I always knew, as long as what I wanted were 2 boys and 2 girls, or I always knew I would have children. I didn't always know I would have children, actually. I come from a very happy family, and I happen to really like my parents, and I really like my brother and sister, but I think probably because I love my work so much, I didn't think, I'm definitely going to do that. I really didn't. I was busy loving my work, and I liked my life. I came down to London, and I was having a very good life, and it was only really, it was a very odd thing. It was when I met the man who's been my husband for a while, and I thought, oh, I'm definitely having your children. So it was, that was a big surprise to me, because it wasn't, I didn't plan it at all. I didn't think by this time I'll have met somebody, and then we'll do that. And so it was a bit sort of, it's pathetic, actually, that I hadn't planned it. I really hadn't planned it, but it was when I met him, I thought, I'd like to see what they'd be like. And so so that was when it happened. And of course, like anybody who is a mother and maybe a father, I don't know, it's more difficult for me to understand that experience, it's entirely transformative. Of course, that's what happens. It makes you more tired, and makes you more wrinkly, and it makes you slightly ill-tempered, but it is unquestionably, obviously, a defining thing for me to be a mother.
Kirsty, hi, I'm Galina. Hi.
Hi, sorry. Hi.
As a seasoned newsreader, I am sure that you've noticed that news reporting and sort of news reading has changed a lot. There is unfortunately a lot of bias, and it's very difficult to form an opinion. So when you watch the news, who do you trust, digital publications or newscasters? And also when it comes to facts and sort of forming the opinions, what do you teach your own kids?
Well, I say to my kids, and it's an ongoing conversation, about trying to understand that just because it has parity on the platform, it doesn't mean it's as true as the next thing you're going to read. So I just try and teach them critical faculties, and that, if you know that 60% of Americans, their main source of news now is Facebook, well, that's an entirely terrifying fact. Not because Facebook in itself is a bad thing, but because it is not a platform for reasoned journalism that has been cross-checked and all those things that we tend to take for granted. My answer is rather predictable in terms of who I trust, and that's not to say that I think on occasions it needs to look at itself. I do trust the BBC. When I was an au pair at 17 in Barcelona and in Geneva, I'd listened to the World Service, and that was my kind of lifeline to the world. It wasn't that far away, but I felt quite far away from home at that point. So the BBC for me is, I do trust the BBC. I wouldn't say it's perfect. Of course it makes mistakes, but I pretty much do trust it. I think one of the great problems with news now, and I didn't want to end up being that grumpy old lady in the corner of the newsroom saying, wasn't like that in my day, but I think one of the problems with news, of course, is the 24-hour news cycle, which demands immediate answers. And we saw that, during the Obama presidency, the idea that they weren't constantly feeding things and that he was judged as a procrastinator and so on. I think the 24-hour news cycle has changed news a lot, and I think that is, and I am going to sound like an old lady now, that is probably to the detriment of news, I would say. I think because things are less considered and less thought through and much more immediate, and it is about it's a picture-led story on 24-hour news. That's inevitable. I sat in newsrooms where those discussions were had. How's the picture? Where's the picture? What's the picture? And if you're on the 24-hour news feed, that is very important. But we have to we have to go with it, don't we? We have to accept it's a changing landscape, and that there were many ways about the news 30 years ago that, you know, or actually 50 years ago when prime ministers were interviewed, and it was, what would you like to tell me, Prime Minister? So I think a scrutinizing media is a great thing, and I'm afraid I don't have too smart an answer to how we negotiate that. I think it's a fairly individual thing for people, and I'm in there too, trying to do that.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Thank you for Desert Island Discs. It's a great program.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, it's about kind of 1.5 questions really. When we're listening to it and we hear you say, and what's your number 3 choice, when you're talking to them in that extraordinary little office, when I saw the pictures in The Guardian last year, I couldn't believe how basic it was. Do you both sit there and listen to the music being played at that
We
point?
do. You know, that was after Roy Plumley did the programme for 43 years. Michael Parkinson took over for just over 2 years, I think, and he introduced that. I think it was Michael, because he couldn't believe that they didn't sit and listen to the music. So we listened to a couple of minutes of the music. And I think it probably is good from the point of view that it helps to dictate the pace and sometimes pieces of music. And people often during a piece of music will have time to either gather their thoughts if they've been talking about something difficult, or are moved by the music, or will sometimes say to me a little extra gem that is unlocked by what they're listening to.
Right.
And so we do play the music. It's not mixed and finessed in the same way as it is on the final program, because obviously the final program you hear has what they call a mix done, so it sounds better, but we listen to a bit of it, and usually just a couple of minutes.
In that case, could I just ask you quickly, I'm both delighted but slightly confused to find now that if I listen on catch-up, it's a longer program.
Yes,
How did
so
that come about, and why? And
it comes about because, so if you listen on podcast, the music is cut for rights reasons, but if you listen on catch-up, for example, Stella McCartney's program was an hour long and we broadcast it at 45. We would like the program to be an hour long. The people who make it, we think it'd be nice, but for quite obvious reasons to do with scheduling, it sits in a 45-minute slot, and nobody's going to mess with the Archers, least of all me. So it's really the idea that there was more good stuff. That's the reason. You don't like it when it's longer? It's the idea that, you know, there's extra stuff in there that you might be interested in, and therefore, because so many more people now, you know, we get millions of downloads on Catch Up and iPlayer. So many people listen to it that way that we just feel if we've got extra good stuff, then why wouldn't we want to make it available to the listener? And the reason that doesn't happen is scheduling reasons on air.
I must say, I can't imagine the music not being played. I've always assumed that it was.
Peculiar, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you need precisely the music to conjure up, you know, your emotions.
Exactly.
And then tell it. I mean, you know, if you were doing it and you have David Bowie, that Suicide song, that will evoke certain emotions for sure.
Absolutely.
Go on.
Hi, I'm a former BBC planning editor and guest booker.
Well done.
And after 21 years, I ran, so I didn't become the grumpy woman.
Right.
But I did want to ask you a
Can you
question.
put your microphone in your mouth if you're a proper journalist?
Well, no, it's because actually I think I don't need it. That's why I was...
What did you say?
You're perfectly clear to me.
I walked into that.
You're perfectly clear to me.
Thank you. If I was your editor and I said to you, we have 2 more programs. You can bring someone back, and your last guest ever, who would they be and why? Very welcome.
Oh, goodness me. Oh, goodness me. I'll tell you, when Dustin Hoffman was there, he had 2, I can only describe them as Velociraptor LA publicists. Yeah, you can picture the scene. So they were, as it happened, they had come down, because publicists they're obviously not in the studio, but there were 2 of them in the control room, and we have since revised our structure for that. They now go somewhere else to listen, but they were there. And they actually said to my editor,
"Has anybody ever just done 6? Because we're pressed for time."
To which my editor came through, because I wear headphones, the guest doesn't, to say, Dustin's publicist, and she told me what he said. So I tell Dustin, because he seems like a man with a good sense of humor. And I'm going to swear. Is it fine if I swear?
Of course.
Right. So, excuse me for swearing. My mum's not here, so I feel fine. So he turned round, so the control room's behind him, I'm there. And he just said, "Can you just fuck off?" He said, "'Cause I've got so much to say." And I think he would still be there talking, because Dustin had a lot to say. So maybe we could still have Dustin.
He's got a hang up about his ugliness.
He's got quite a lot of hang-ups.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to look like Brad Pitt. And,
and it's extraordinary. A man of his accomplishment. That he was never cast as a leading man apart from in The Graduate.
I'm not surprised with his nose.
He was absolutely delicious, I have to say. He really was. So probably I'd still like to be talking to him, because but also Zadie Smith, the author, was extraordinary and absolutely in the moment of the interview, which I think Zadie Smith has been interviewed a lot. Writers often have ready what they're going to say, because that's the way they process life, and here's to that. She was absolutely in the moment of it, and has led such an interesting life in terms of her ethnicity, living in Britain, being an intellectual, being just, and I think she's a terrific writer. So it would be, I mean, Dustin would probably edge it, but it would be. And the other question you asked, I'm sorry, I've forgotten now. The other was. Oh, okay. So one
Your
person
last
on my list.
one, yes.
Well, it'd be David, obviously.
That is the nicest thing anybody, alive, dead, or in future born, said to me.
When you first started presenting the news standing up and there was all that hysteria, looking back on it, it does seem kind of ridiculous, but what was it like to live through all of that? Because a lot of those insults were gendered and the hysteria must have been mad.
Well, I think probably, what was it like at the time? I just thought there was a lot of kind of, who is this woman? And she's blonde, obviously an idiot. And all you can do is just go and do your job. That's it. It doesn't matter, does it? They're just filling columns of people who were snooty. And I remember once when I'd moved down to London, walking up Oxford Street, and Channel 5 had taken out all these sort of ludicrous, cheesy adverts. And I was followed by a bus that went at the same speed as me with my photograph on it. And I thought, I thought, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that. But with the stuff that people wrote, people have a right to their opinion. People are filling news columns. And then after we'd been on air 3 weeks, on the front of Guardian 2, there was just a picture, and it said, "Is this woman changing the face of television news?" Which, of course, I wasn't. But I thought, well, that's okay. They kind of think I can do the job now. And, you have to just go and do the job. It's like anything. It's like being given Desert Island Discs, which is is, I hope still, but a jewel. And you think, well, all you can do is try to do that job. And if people say to you, I remember before we went on air with Channel 5 News, Michael Heseltine saying to me at a Tory party conference, "I don't want to be interviewed by some little smart aleck in a skirt." And I thought, okay. You just go and do your job. And I wore trouser suits because of that, incidentally. But I think you just go and do your job, don't you? It's like any of us here. You always have people who think maybe...
Who said that going on to Desert Islands is like getting a live OBE?
Yeah, we have a lot of sirs and lords and ladies who say, "My mum didn't care when I went to collect my damehood, but she cares now I'm here." People, I think it's because it's been going for so long. I think that's what it is. It has that status.
I've been listening to you at work to keep me thinking of home. And I've listened to a few really poignant ones. The David Attenborough one in 2012, although I don't really like her, Nicola Sturgeon's one was really interesting. And as a rugby fan, I thought Nigel Owen's one was extraordinary. And made me cry in the office, which was on day 2.
What were you doing listening to it in the office would be my obvious question. Yeah.
But two things. One, has there ever, or what's the moment that you've ever been sort of completely dumbstruck from something someone said? And also, could you introduce yourself as Kirsty Young from Desert Island Discs to us? Hello.
Can I do what? What did you say? Can I do what?
And welcome to Desert Island Disc, Digby Walker.
But I never say that on the program. I say my castaway this week, but I don't. Yeah, I don't. I can. Hello, I'm Kirsty Young, and welcome to Desert Island Disc. That's kind of weird. I'm so thrown by that. What was the question you asked before that? Yes. Yes, there are times when I interviewed David Knott, who's a surgeon who's worked in, every war zone in from the Middle East to Kosovo, through Syria. We had to stop the recording because it was extraordinary to hear him speak, and he told a story which was included, and we both just had to stop for a minute because he told a story about a little girl. He was in the former Yugoslavia. The city was being carpet bombed. He was operating on a little girl, and all her viscera was out. He was trying to save her life, and he was there with the anaesthetist, and they were told that the hospital would be bombed in the next matter of, I think, in under 10 minutes, the way that the carpet bombing was taking place. And everybody left, and he said to the anaesthetist, "I'm staying, are you staying?" And the anaesthetist said, "I'm staying." And they basically stayed with the little girl to die with her. And the hospital was not bombed, and they saved the little girl's life, and he met the little girl 4 years later, and she was fine and in school, and everything was going well. And we had to stop the recording because he was crying, I was crying, I couldn't ask him a question. It was very unprofessional and very, was extraordinary. He's an extraordinary man, and he's done extraordinary things, and he told it in a way that was at once very matter of fact, but also entirely poignant. And that's...
All right, quickly, a couple more questions.
Quick question. So when you've done so many where you listen, you find out about their childhood and how it impacts the rest of their lives, and it's almost like you're a psychologist where you're hearing the tracks of their lives. How has it affected the way that maybe you view motherhood, or you're seeing the impact of the things that you do in the
I'm terrified.
Biggest yeah, it must be.
Because, well, first of all, I absolutely would not in any sense equate myself with somebody who is a brilliant professional trained psychologist. I'm just trying to find the pattern of somebody's life. But yes, it's always, it makes you realize how important those moments are. I think birth order is a huge one, which I've sort of learned, where somebody sits in a family. Because all the time, when I look through, I get very, very brilliant research notes, which I read a great big pack of them, and I always look through the dates in people's lives of when the other children were born, and I think that can often be so important in people's lives. So that's probably made me more conscious of that.
Right, quickly, two more questions.
Hi there, Kirsty. My name is Susan.
Hi.
Just wanted to ask you, outside Desert Island Discs, obviously we've heard a lot about it tonight, what is it in your life or your career that you haven't done yet that you'd really love to do?
Have a longer holiday with my husband. My husband loves to work and doesn't take much time off. Do you know what I'd love? I think I'd love to force my husband and kids to go walking the West Highland Way with me, which they would hate. And I would love. Yeah, that's it.
All right, last question.
Sorry, another Desert Island one to end on, but your guests often drop their guard and open up, and you said interviews quite often go on tangents you don't expect.
Yes.
Have any guests ever asked for elements to be cut, or actually said you can't air the interview afterwards?
We've had, there are things that we have to be aware of, the BBC guidelines, when we transmit a programme, and those are really concerned with certainly children. And people might talk about children or circumstances that their children are in, and obviously also the laws of libel. So if somebody says, well, my third husband was a drunk. He was a drunk. So we have to check and see if he's alive, because he might sue us. So we have to be mindful of things like that. But if somebody asks us to cut, we always say, we understand your concerns, and the editorial choices are ours, and we hope you'll be happy with the program. Sometimes that can be very awkward. But that's where we stand, and that's our, to say policy sounds rather pompous, but that's the way we do it. And we hope that that, you know, that the absolute essence of the program is a celebration of somebody's life. And within that, you can go to awkward and difficult places, but it is a celebration, and we ask people to trust us with that, and it very rarely happens that they throw up a stink. You know, sometimes we get publicists on the phone, but luckily that's not my department, so they don't phone me.
Anyway, all I can say is that I've managed to achieve what I surreptitiously wanted to do, to mention all 8 of your discs in between questions, so I can now brag that I interview Kirsty Young in exactly the same format that she has. But Kirsty, it has been a joy having you, and I'm very, very glad that you've ended this summer series at China Exchange on a very high note, and I think this is a testament of the warmth and admiration the general audience have for you.
Thank you.
And will you please all join me in thanking Kirsty?
Thank you very much. I'm glad you used a 10-year-old photograph.